At 6:58 on a Wednesday morning, you stand in your kitchen with a cup of coffee and look through the window. Your neighbor is loading suitcases into a brand new Range Rover. Then you glance toward your own driveway. A 2011 Corolla sits there with more than 160,000 miles, and the check engine light has been on so long that you barely notice it anymore. Your brokerage account is open on the counter. $438,000. You close the app. Just coffee. Work. The same driveway. If someone walked past your house that morning, they would probably assume your neighbor was doing better financially. And that raises a question worth sitting with. What if looking wealthy and becoming wealthy are two completely different games? 6 years earlier, you would not have understood that. At 26, you had just become an account manager and your salary had climbed to $58,000. It felt like a major achievement. You remember reading the offer letter more than once, imagining what the new title would mean when people heard it. But there was one problem. Your old Civic still worked. That should have been enough. It wasn't. You had started noticing the cars outside the office. Newer sedans. Luxury badges. People arriving at client meetings looking successful before they even said a word. You became embarrassed by the Civic. So you leased a Jetta for $327 a month. Technically, it was transportation. Emotionally, it was something else. It was proof. You wanted people to see the promotion before they knew the salary. Then came a Coach bag purchased on a credit card charging almost 25% interest. Your coworker had one, and you liked the way nobody questioned it when she placed it on the conference table. You wanted that same reaction. The problem was that your checking account often held less than $600. But at 26, that didn't feel unusual. Everyone around you seemed to be doing some version of the same thing. Your friend Tyler was simply better at making it visible. Tyler worked in commercial insurance, earned roughly what you did, and leased a BMW. He had an expensive watch and seemed to enjoy talking about what it cost. He wasn't foolish. He wasn't irresponsible in some dramatic way. He had simply accepted an idea that millions of people accept without realizing it. If you're earning more, your lifestyle should show it. Then one evening, Walter Kessler came to dinner at your parents' house. Walter was 74. He had owned 3 car dealerships and had spent decades watching people walk on his showroom floors determined to look successful. Yet he drove a battered 2004 Volvo wagon with a dent in the rear bumper. Someone joked about it. Why would a man who had made that much money still drive something so old? Walter smiled and said, "The car doesn't know what I'm worth. Neither does anyone looking at it." The conversation continued, but you didn't. The sentence stayed with you. That night, you opened your banking app from bed. $340 in checking. $1,900 in credit card debt. Nothing invested. You were earning $58,000, but your financial foundation was practically non-existent. You saw the difference between income and wealth, and you had to ask yourself a difficult question. Were you spending money to improve your life, or spending it to convince other people that your life was improving? One Tuesday during lunch, sitting alone in your car, you opened a Roth IRA and invested $50 in an index fund. Nobody knew. That mattered because there was no applause, no social reward, and no reason to stop. A few months later, you canceled the Jetta lease. The termination fee was $612, and it hurt to write the check. But keeping the lease would have cost roughly $11,700 over its full term. Instead, you bought the old Civic back from your cousin for $3,100 cash. Then you automated $150 from every paycheck into investments. Later, after the credit card debt was gone, you increased it to $200. There were no hot stock tips, no overnight success, no complicated strategy. Every 2 weeks, money moved before you could spend it. Meanwhile, Tyler upgraded his BMW. By 29, your investment account had quietly crossed $22,000. Your apartment still had ordinary furniture. Your car still looked old. From the outside, almost nothing had changed. But underneath the surface, everything was different. Your lifestyle was roughly the same. Your financial position wasn't. Then came the real test. At 31, your investments had grown to around $80,000 when the market suffered a major correction. Over several weeks, roughly $19,000 disappeared from the value on your screen. You checked the account repeatedly. You imagined selling and protecting what remained. This is where many investors discover what their strategy really means. It's easy to say you are a long-term investor when prices are rising. What happens when you watch years of progress disappear in a matter of weeks? You called Walter. He reminded you that an account balance moving lower was not automatically the same as permanently losing the wealth. Unless you turned the decline into a sale, you stayed invested. More importantly, you kept contributing. 6 months after the market bottomed, your account had recovered to about $94,000. The lesson stayed with you. Wealth isn't only built by knowing what to buy. It's also built by learning how not to panic. Soon afterward, your career moved forward again. You accepted a director-level role paying $86,000, and the company offered a $650 monthly car allowance. This was another opportunity to make your success visible. You could lease something impressive. Instead, you invested the $650. You kept driving the Civic. One day, someone from your old workplace saw you in the parking lot and asked if everything was okay. The Civic still runs. But there was another truth they couldn't see. The money you weren't spending on a luxury lease was being redirected toward a future you couldn't yet see. Over decades, consistent investments can grow into hundreds of thousands of dollars. The car would have given you a few years of a nicer interior and a more impressive badge. The investment could eventually buy something much more valuable. Choices. At 33, you experienced the moment when the numbers began to change psychologically. That quarter, you had contributed around $2,400. Your investments had grown by approximately $3,900. For the first time, your money had produced more growth than your paycheck had added. What happens when your money starts working almost as hard as you do? What happens when your financial progress no longer depends entirely on getting another raise? Later that year, the Civic's transmission failed. The repair estimate was $2,700. Years earlier, that bill would have meant stress, credit card debt, and several difficult conversations with yourself. Now you simply approve the repair. Priya, your girlfriend, noticed. You didn't even flinch, she said. You realized she was right. The repair hadn't become cheaper. You had become financially stronger. By 35, your investments had passed $340,000. You finally replaced the Civic, but not with a luxury vehicle. You bought a 2-year-old Accord for $19,400 in cash. Tyler saw it and asked why you hadn't bought something more impressive. You could afford far more than the Accord. That was exactly why you didn't need the more expensive car. Around the same time, your company offered you another promotion, an additional $34,000 a year. On paper, it was an easy yes. But the position came with brutal hours and a reputation for burning people out. You turned it down. Years earlier, rejecting $34,000 would have felt irresponsible. Now you understood something your younger self couldn't have understood. Money is valuable because of the freedom it gives you, not because of the number printed on your paycheck. If earning another $34,000 costs you your evenings, weekends, relationships, and peace of mind, are you actually becoming richer? Wealth stopped being only about accumulation. It became about control. At 37, your net worth crossed $700,000. You didn't change your clothes or your car to match the number. You simply stopped needing money to communicate your status. Then Tyler's BMW was repossessed. His income hadn't vanished. His obligations had simply grown faster than his financial foundation. You helped him with a month's rent and never gave him a lecture. Because you remembered yourself at 26. You remembered the Jetta, the Coach bag, the desire to look successful before you had actually built security. The difference was that you eventually changed what you measured. At first, progress meant nicer things. Later, progress meant lower debt. Then growing investments. Then the ability to absorb unexpected expenses. Then the ability to say no. And eventually, the ability to decide how you wanted to spend your time. There was no day when somebody handed you a certificate and said, "You're wealthy now." There was just a Tuesday, a number on a screen, and the realization that you no longer made every financial decision from fear. Then Walter died 2 winters later. At his funeral, his daughter mentioned something that surprised everyone. Walter had left behind far more money than the family realized. He had accumulated it quietly, in accounts nobody had known to ask about. The old Volvo suddenly made perfect sense. Years later, you're back in the same kitchen at 6:58 on another Wednesday morning. The chipped mug is gone, although you've kept it in a drawer for reasons you can't quite explain. Outside, your neighbor is loading luggage into another Range Rover. You wave. Your 4-year-old Accord sits in the driveway, completely paid off. You open your brokerage account. $1.12 million. You go to work, not because you were trapped there, but because you chose to stay. That is the real difference. You didn't become wealthy when the account crossed $1 million. You became wealthy years earlier, when you stopped asking your money to make you look successful and started asking it to make you free. So take a hard look at your own life. What are you buying because you truly value it? And what are you buying because you want someone else to believe you've succeeded? Because the most meaningful signs of wealth may be invisible. A paid-off car, money in an emergency fund, investments that continue growing while you sleep, the ability to handle a $2,700 repair without panic, the freedom to reject a promotion, the ability to keep working because you want to, not because one missed paycheck could destroy your life. That is what quiet wealth looks like. It doesn't always arrive with a new car. Sometimes it looks exactly like the old one. And perhaps that's the final lesson Walter was trying to teach you all those years ago. You don't need your possessions to tell people what you're worth. Your money doesn't need to be visible. Your freedom does. And one Wednesday morning, when you finally realize that you can choose how you spend your time, where you work, what you buy, and what you refuse to buy, you'll understand something your 26-year-old self couldn't see. The goal was never to look wealthy. And that realization changes everything about money. The goal was to become wealthy enough that you no longer needed to look it.